Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Captain's Table. I am your host, Captain B-Nard, and topic of discussion today is going to be an overview and draft analysis for the Battle Hub Draft League. So, I know I've been alluding to this for quite some time now, but yes, it is finally here. We have finally joined up a brand new draft league, and we finally drafted our team, and yeah, we're ready to go with that. So, unfortunately, because of the Pokemon Home update or the lack of information, I should say, surrounding it, the beginning of the league was delayed for quite some time, but we're finally here and we're finally ready to go with it. So I'm going to do this video the same way that I've done these in the past, where I kind of go over the rules of the road for this league, go over the team that I drafted, and yeah, just kind of talk about everything important related to this league. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say about that. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into checking this out. So, first thing I want to note is that this league is, as I said, the Battle Hub Draft League Season 1, or BHDL1 for short. And this is going to be a league that is run primarily out of the Battle Hub Discord server. So that's a server that I've been in for quite some time now. I've been active in, and it's a good community of people. Pretty friendly, although they do pretty competitive Wi-Fi battling in there. And so, yeah, most, if not all, of the participants in this league are going to be out of that, though the actual owner of that Discord server is not in the league himself, so just have to call him out publicly for that. But yeah, kind of is what it is there. I think he's in a different league, so that's why, but definitely had to call him out on that because that's what I do. So, yeah, I look for some pretty stiff competition going into this, as there are a lot of good battlers in there, and I am familiar with a lot of the participants in this league. I have battled several of them casually before, and they are strong competitive battlers, so this is definitely not going to be a cakewalk for us by any stretch of the imagination. So, yeah, having said that, I think we're going to go ahead and get into the actual rules of this league, which are very similar to leagues that we've participated in the past. So here we go. This is a point-based draft league, as all the other leagues that I've joined in the past are. In this league, we get 110 points to use in the draft. We can draft between 9 and 11 Pokemon, and the point values of the Pokemon range from 17 all the way down to 1. So that's kind of the bare bones of the idea here. It is a snaking draft, or a alternating wheel, whatever you want to call it, which means that essentially the way it works is you start off with whoever is the number one on the draft order, and then you draft 1 through 16, and then in the next round it flips from 16 to 1. So essentially the people who are in the 1 position and the 16 position are kind of in the best spots because they get to be on the wheel, as it were, of the draft, so they get 2 picks simultaneously, so that's a pretty good spot to be, in my opinion. Conversely, the kind of the worst spot to be in the draft is probably the number 8 and number 9 spots, because you're right in the middle, so the draft alternating really doesn't benefit you ever in any way, or the order alternating, I should say. And unfortunately for me, I happen to land in the number 8 spot on the draft order, which means that I was dead center, so I didn't really get to benefit from that alternating draft order, unfortunately. But it kind of is what it is. You have to work with those things in these types of situations. So additionally, after we get done with the main part of the draft, we then get to assign Terra captains for our teams. So we have up to 3 Pokemon that we've drafted that we can assign as Terra Captains, and those Pokemon's point values cannot exceed 23 points. So, however it works out, everybody gets at least 2 essentially, because Pokemon that have a point value of 15 or higher, so those are the 15, 16, and 17 point tiered Pokemon, are unable to be declared as Terra Captains, just due to the fact, and I think most leagues do this, that it would be kind of unfair because those Pokemon are pretty broken. And with Terra, many of them would actually have to be illegal in the league, as they are illegal in Smogon, in part because Terra makes them very, very good, to an unfair degree sometimes. And they want to try and allow as many Pokemon as possible to be used in the draft, which makes sense. So, um, and then the other thing is, throughout the season, we have up to 5 transactions that we can use. So we can trade away or um, whatever, up to 5 Pokemon, but this actually also includes switching Terra Captains. So you need to use a transaction to switch a Terra Captain. So say obviously you declare your up to say you declare 3 Terra Captains. Um, at the start of the league, and then you decide one week that you want another Pokemon to be your a Terra Captain for that week. You have to spend a transaction to change that Pokemon into a Terra Captain, and that's just a Terra Captain for you going forward. And what I mean by Terra Captain is maybe self-explanatory, but those are the only Pokemon on your team that can terastallize during battle. So, um, yeah, so that's kind of the general overview of the rules of this league. Pretty straightforward, like I said, very similar to other leagues that we've had. I think there are only a handful of Pokemon that are actually banned in this league, although maybe a handful more now that the home update came out and we got all those box art legendaries back, unfortunately. But yeah, those are pretty much the rules of the road for the league. And yeah, we are going to go ahead then and move into the best part, obviously, and that is going to be the team that we drafted. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the BHDL1 Philadelphia Pidgeys. So here they are. Um, as you can see, I'm going to go over every draft pick that I made, kind of why I made it, and what I think the strengths of the draft picks are, and kind of how I'm hoping they're going to work for me. So, um, yeah, as you can see, our number one draft pick this time around in the league was Iron Moth. So this is the new fire poison type future paradox version of Volcarona here, and this Pokemon is very fast, hits very hard on the special side. Um, Obviously, being a future paradox Pokemon, has access to Quark Drive, which increases its highest stat when it's either holding a booster energy or on electric terrain, which is going to be something that's going to come into play a little bit later, as we move down what we drafted. um, so yeah, I drafted Iron Moth essentially because I wanted to start off strong with something that could be a potential sweeper. Iron Moth also has a pretty diverse move pool, so it gets access to a lot of good coverage options. And so I thought it was kind of a good way to start off the team because there's a few different ways you can use it, but it all boils down to being a pretty strong potential special sweeper. So that's kind of what I was aiming for, and it was the highest point valued Pokemon I drafted at 16 points. Um, so unfortunately, obviously, it cannot terastallize, or I couldn't declare it as a Terra Captain because it was too high of a point value. But yeah, something that I hope will put some work in for me, and if set up properly, if set up correctly, could potentially get me some sweeps, or at least do some serious damage, maybe some partial sweeps to some teams. So I'm hoping that this kind of turns up big for me. And this is kind of always the way that I draft teams typically, and the way most people would draft a team is the first Pokemon is usually always something that you want to uh, be able to inflict some big damage with, something that you kind of want to build around, and hopefully use it to do some big damage. So that's where Iron Moth kind of comes in here. So Moving along, the second pick was going to be, of course, as you all know, who've been following for me for any length of time, you were going to know what the second pick was going to be, and that was going to be Gudra. So this probably goes without saying at this point, but I'm going to say it anyway for those of you who might be new to the channel. I have drafted Gudra on every single one of my draft league teams that I've ever had, and I've always drafted it at the number 2 spot as well. So in keeping with that tradition, I really had no choice but to go ahead and draft Gudra at the number 2 spot here. Gudra is a premier special wall, also hits pretty hard on the special side, has a really wide move pool as well, and it's just an all-around good Pokemon to have. So I'm very familiar with Gudra, obviously. I think I've used it, or I know I should say that I've used it in more Wi-Fi battles than any other Pokemon. So I'm very familiar with Gudra, and yeah, I had to keep the tradition alive. But it also kind of complements the Iron Moth pretty well from a weaknesses and resistances standpoint as well. So yeah, I don't really have too much else to say about that, as pretty much everything has been extensively covered with Gudra, what it can do so far. So moving along to our number 3 pick, I went ahead and grabbed Orthworm. So this is the new mono steel type from this generation here, and Orthworm is a premier physical wall if ever there was one. Obviously, the steel typing is incredible, and of course, it also has a signature ability, Earth Eater, which turns its ground weakness into a ground immunity, actually. So that gives it an incredible weakness to resistance and immunity ratio. I believe it's 2 to 12, which is an incredible ratio. um, it's pretty bulky. It's not terrible as bulk, I should say, on the special side either. With HP investment, has a pretty decent move pool too, some nice handy utility options, and some decent offensive options too. One thing to note with Orthworm is that we have some moves that are banned this season, and Shed Tail is one of them. So the kind of the main way that most people use their Orthworm with the Shed Tail strategy is not going to be a thing, because the move Shed Tail is banned, as it is in Smogon as of now as well, I believe. However, and you guys might think I'm crazy for saying this, but I truly do feel this way. After using Orthworm in Scarlet and Violet, I have to say that I think Orthworm might be just as good without Shed Tail. And before you think I'm crazy, hear me out on this. Um, I think that Orthworm is obviously a very tanky, very bulky Pokemon, specifically on the physical side. It's also very slow. So I really don't think Shed Tail complements Orthworm very well, because Orthworm is the kind of Pokemon that you want to be around for as many turns as possible. You want it to be as healthy as possible. Um, and you want it to be able to tank hits from just about anything, again, specifically on the physical side. So Shed Tail is pretty counterintuitive to that, obviously, because it halves its health in order to use it. So I kind of am okay with not being able to use Shed Tail on Orthworm. Like I said, it has a lot of other handy options, from both a utility and an offensive standpoint. So I kind of don't mind not having access to Shed Tail here. The other thing I would note at this point is that at this point in the draft, I usually always look for a strong Steel type Pokemon to kind of complement Gudra as a strong Dragon Steel defensive pairing, and that was another reason that I really wanted to prioritize grabbing Orthworm, even though it was lower down on the point value scale. So, yeah, I'm hoping to do some big things with Orthworm. I'm hoping that it will come through for me this season. And it's a Pokemon that I really didn't like very much at first, but it really did grow on me. As you guys know, I did Shiny Hunt it a while back as well. And so, yeah, I'm definitely hoping for it to do some big things here for me in this league. Obviously, I drafted it very high for a reason. And yeah, we'll hope that it can live up to that. So. But moving along, we're going to get to our number 4 pick. And for our number 4 slot here at this point in the draft, I was thinking, it's a little dry around here. I could really use some water. And so I wanted to grab a bulky water type at this point for my team. And so I decided to, after being sniped a little bit, I decided to go with Gastrodon. So. Gastrodon is another Pokemon that I am extremely familiar with. It's one that I've used on every single battle series here on YouTube. However, I've never actually drafted it in a draft league. So I decided it was time, after all this time, to go ahead and grab it. Gastrodon is a premier tank, obviously. It's got that great water ground dual typing that leaves it with that only that one weakness to grass, though it is an X4 weakness, obviously. It's got some handy utility options. It hits decently hard on the special side too, actually. And yeah, it's an all around solid Pokemon that you could add to any team really, and so I decided that that was definitely going to be what I wanted to do. Also, kind of helped me balance out some weaknesses and resistances and that kind of thing with what I was working with the team at that point. So um, yeah, I don't have too much else to say about Gastrodon. It's a pretty self explanatory Pokemon. Unfortunately, it does hurt from the lack of Scald in this generation a little bit, but um, that's something we'll just have to deal with. So, but yeah, moving along, that's going to bring us to our number 5 pick in the draft. So at this point in the draft, I was thinking, the one thing that I really want is something that could be a potential physical sweeper. And I was really going back and forth between how I wanted to proceed because I had this idea when I started off the draft by grabbing Iron Moth. I had this loose idea in my head that I wanted to grab at least one Cork Drive Pokemon. I wanted to grab at least one Unburdened Pokemon, and I wanted to grab an Electric Terrain Setter to complete that whole strategy. So, having said all of those things, there was one Pokemon that checked that box better than any other at this point, and that was Hawlucha. So, I went ahead and grabbed Hawlucha as my number 5 pick. Obviously, everybody knows or should know at this point what Hawlucha does, the strategy with Unburden, doubling its speed. And obviously, if you're on a terrain and you can pop one of the seeds to go ahead and activate that, that is a pretty tried and true strategy. So no need to really over explain that. But Hawlucha is a really good Pokemon. It's actually much more versatile than just hitting very hard on the physical side, though. Obviously, it's very fast too, um, but it can also use some handy utility moves as well, some pivots, that kind of thing. So Hawlucha actually can be used in many different ways. Um, and so I'm actually interested to see what this guy can do in Draft League. I have used Hawlucha a little bit in the past, and yeah, I'm hoping that I can make something happen with it as at this point, that kind of fed to my 6th pick. So, as I mentioned, I already had the Quark Drive Mon, I already had the Unburdened Mon, so now what I needed was the Terrain Setter. And as you all might know at this point, there is only one Pokemon as of now in this generation that can set the electric terrain legally with an asterisk because obviously Miraidon sets the electric terrain, the Pokemon Violet box art legendary. However, that thing is, of course, banned. So there is only one legal option to pursue, and that is Pincurchin. So Pincurchin is a Pokemon that I have not used much. I just started using it recently a little bit in some doubles games for the first time. Came out in Generation 8, obviously. So it's a little bit of a newer Pokemon, too. And yeah, its main feature is it can set the electric terrain. So that's what I needed at this point to kind of complete a little electric terrain strategy on my draft team with Iron Moth and Hawlucha. So I was glad that I grabbed this because there were actually one or two other people kind of gunning for Pincurchin, but I was able to snap it up before they could, so that is definitely a big plus for me. So that kind of completes the strategy. But Pincurchin actually has some other functions as well. It actually can hit decently hard as well, and it does have quite a few setup options too, setting hazards and whatnot as well. So Pincurchin is actually more than just a terrain setter. It can do other things, and we're definitely going to have to hope we can make it do some other things too, because we're not looking for a Pokemon that can just set the electric terrain here, although that is obviously the primary function of this Pokemon, but it definitely can do some other things as well that we're going to have to hope that we can make it do. So, moving along, that brings us to a little over halfway through the draft, and at this point, I made a decision, and I'm hoping that it doesn't come back to bite me in the ass. But that decision is as follows. So I was kind of in the fork in the road because at this point in the draft there were uh, still some Quark Drive Mons that had not been drafted, so I could have grabbed another one of those. There were still some Unburdened Mons that had not been drafted. I could have grabbed another one of those. But what I decided to do was go in a different direction, and here's why. I wanted to sort of craft a team that could be interchangeable so that I didn't have to bring the electric terrain strategy every week if I didn't want to, or if I decided that it did not benefit me enough. So, had I gone with more Quark Drive Mons or more Unburdened Mons, what I would have had to do is that would have essentially locked me into bringing electric terrain every single week. And that was not something that I wanted to do. So, I decided that I needed a strong alternative to the electric terrain strategy in case I decided not to bring that. And so that is why, for my seventh pick, I decided to go with another very potentially deadly fast and special sweeper, I should say, in Espathra. So Espathra is a new Generation 9 Pokemon as well, Mono Psychic type. A very unique Pokemon because it gets access to some very interesting options as far as abilities. With Speed Boost is obviously the main one, as well as setup moves and stored power and all that great stuff. No need to over explain that. But yeah, Espathra is a premier special sweeper potentially if used properly. Now, unfortunately, once again, since it is in the 15-point tier, it is forbidden from being declared as a Terra Captain. So I believe this was the only other Pokemon that I drafted that was too high of a value that could be a Terra Captain, aside from Iron Moth. So we won't be able to do that with it, but we can still use it in other ways, and we're going to see what we can make it do if we bring it, or however many times we bring it, I should say. But yeah, this is going to be the start of an alternate path for us to take if we choose not to do the electric terrain on any given week. So yeah, Espathra is here. So that is going to feed us to our number 8 pick. So at this point, I decided I needed a little more bulk on the team too, and I needed a Pokemon that was fairy to kind of help balance out some weaknesses and resistances. So I decided to go ahead and grab Wigglytuff as my number 8 pick. Now, I have actually used Wigglytuff, and I've used it in Draft League on two separate occasions. It's actually been part of my Draft League teams, although I've never actually drafted it. The other two times that I had Wigglytuff were times where I had actually used a transaction during the season to grab it. But this time I decided I was going to go ahead and actually draft it. So that's what I did. Now, Wigglytuff is a pretty bulky Pokemon, actually. Can hit decently on the special side as well, and it has a very, very wide move pool, which is great, obviously. And so, honestly, I think Wigglytuff is a sleeper Pokemon. A lot of people sleep on it. It's got good abilities. It's obviously got really good typing as well. And I think if Wigglytuff's base stats were just a little bit higher, you would see people use this thing a lot more than you do. But unfortunately, its defenses aren't the best, even though it's got a lot of HP. Its special attack is not the best, even though it's not bad. And so you don't see a ton of people using it. But I definitely think it could put in some work in the right matchups. We're kind of at the point in the draft league here where I'm going to be drafting stuff that you might not see every week. Unless I decide to massively overhaul my strategy. But yeah, that's kind of where Wigglytuff sits in the draft. So that is going to bring us to our number 9 pick. And for the number 9 pick, we went ahead and drafted a Pokemon that we had drafted one time previously. That is Arcanine. So feeding back to the strategy that I had employed or had explained, where I kind of wanted to not be fully locked into bringing the electric terrain every week if I didn't want to. I drafted Arcanine because it is a really versatile Pokemon. Hits very hard on the physical side. It can be bulky. It can be fast. It has a lot of good options. It has a good move pool. Um, and so I wanted a Pokemon like that. It also has obviously strong priority with extreme speed. So Intimidate as well is a nice option. So so I felt that if I chose not to bring electric terrain, this would definitely be a really strong option for my team. So um, I don't know if Arcanine is going to be quite the same role as it was on the team last time I drafted it, because in the other league that I drafted in, it was kind of like a cornerstone of the team that I brought pretty much every week to battle. I don't see that being the case this time around. However, I guess I should never say never. We'll have to see how it shakes out. And also, as I'll get to in just a second here, um, there is definitely a really good reason for me to bring Arcanine as much as possible. But I want to finish talking about the rest of my draft picks first. So for my last draft picks, now some people cut it at 9 Pokemon here because obviously you could draft between 9 and 11 Pokemon. But I decided because at this point I had the extra points left over. Because full disclosure, during this draft league, I kind of did math wrong and I thought that I had less points per pick to work with than I actually did. So I ended up with some points left over, and I ended up drafting more lower tier stuff. As you guys know, that's kind of what I use anyway, and what I'm more comfortable with anyway. Um, but yeah, I probably could have um, spent more points to get more higher point value Pokemon, but we'll talk about that more later. But in any event, at this point in the draft, for my number 10 pick, I went ahead and grabbed Barraskewda. So again, Barraskewda is a Pokemon that I have drafted. Well, I shouldn't say drafted. I have used it in Draft League once before, although I didn't actually draft it. I had transacted it. It was only on the team for a brief period in time before I transacted it away last time. So I decided, since Barraskewda is very fast and hits very hard on the physical side, I decided it was another good alternative to go ahead and grab. Again, probably not a Pokemon you'll see every week, but it is a Pokemon that I think has some handy options. It is, again, it's a pretty strong physical attacker, very fast, obviously, has access to priority with Aqua Jet too. So, yeah, it's just something that I wanted to have around. And then finally, for our 11th pick, we went ahead and grabbed Brute Bonnet. So this is the new grass dark type past Paradox Pokemon from this generation. Um, Obviously has access to photosynthesis, which is not really going to factor in because we don't have any Sunsetters on the team. But it does hit very hard on the physical side. It's got some really good bulk to it, actually, as well. Typing is kind of a mixed bag. It's pretty good in one way, but not so great in another way. And it does have access to Spore as well. So some handy options here. Priority, obviously, with Sucker Punch. But again, this is a Pokemon that I probably you won't be seeing every week. I won't be bringing every week, but is a Pokemon that, again, if I decide to do some team alternation, is definitely going to be useful. And depending on the matchup, it could definitely be useful. So yeah, that rounds out the team. I am pretty happy with this team, I will say. But again, I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But the final thing we had to do after the draft was over was declare our Terra captains. So as you can probably tell at this point, I went ahead and put a star next to the Pokemon that I declared as my Terra captain. So obviously you will see those are going to be Hawlucha and Arcanine for starters. So for Hawlucha, I decided to make that a Terra captain because obviously, if I'm trying to set up to sweep with Hawlucha, which is something that it is kind of the premier thing that it can do, having it as a Terra Captain is going to be very useful if I decide that there's a Terra type that would really benefit it either defensively or offensively, although Hawlucha does have a very wide move pool. But even granted that, there are some obviously types it does not have access to, so it being able to terastallize could be invaluable depending on the situation, obviously. And then, of course, with Arcanine, having that as a Terra Captain is really useful because of the strategy that I'm sure you're all familiar with at this point, with the Terra Normal boosted extreme speeds, which do hit very, very hard. Um, so that's definitely a possibility with Arcanine. Although, who knows, I could change it up if I do bring Arcanine and bring a different Terra. It does, obviously, can use any one of the Terra options. But yeah, that's going to pretty much round off for the Terra Captain. So those are my ones for starters. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough points left over to pick a third one. I kind of went back and forth on who I wanted to declare as my Terra Captains because, as I mentioned, Arcanine probably not a Pokemon you're going to see every week. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to make it a Terra Captain. But at the same time, I figured any of the other Pokemon that I could choose as Terra Captains just wouldn't make as much sense because Arcanine benefits from the Terra much more than them, generally speaking. So I felt like having that option on Arcanine was just a good way to go. Having said that, I feel like you never know. Maybe I'll end up bringing it more than I think I will. But yeah, it'll just all depend on the matchups. So yeah, that kind of covers all of that. Um, so we are going to move on here to some closing thoughts. Now, you might be asking yourself, why are we doing this? Well, I'm going to tell you why we're doing this. Obviously, for fun. That's a given. Obviously, to have some good competitive games, that's a given. But there is a burning question that needs to be answered at this point. And as per the commissioners of the league and the owner of this league himself, we are going to be fighting, ladies and gentlemen, to determine who will be the first ever Pokemon Scholar here on Scarlet and Violet. This is something that is bigger than big. I cannot overstate this. I cannot exaggerate this. This is huge. This is enormous. This is tremendous. And we need to ask ourselves, in the words of a funny man, who will be the first ever Pokemon Scholar?
That's the real question.
That is the real question. Who will be the first ever Pokemon Scholar? So, just a quick run through of those of you who might not be familiar. That is on the screen right there. Just Weevil. That is the man who owns the Battle Hub Discord server and who is not participating in our Battle Hub Discord server draft league. So, shout out to him for being a good sport, but also giving us the comedic fodder that we so desperately want. And so, yeah, he gave me the inspiration, we will say, to make this a thing, and now it is officially a thing because, as I said, the commissioner, the heads of the draft league have declared officially that whoever wins this draft league will be officially, I can't stress that enough, recognized as the first ever Pokemon Scholar of Scarlet and Violet. And we cannot overstate how huge this is. I am pumped up. I am excited about it. So, some closing remarks here, all jokes aside, and you guys know I love a good joke. But some closing remarks here. So, overall, as far as the draft that I have this season here for the BHDL1 Philadelphia Pidgeys, I am relatively happy with the team that I drafted. I feel like I could be a little happier. I feel like there were some picks that I wanted that got snaked away from me, but that's just kind of the way draft league goes. Um, I feel like being in the number 8 position in the draft order definitely didn't do me any favors as far as the draft. But I will say, aside from all that, I am still pretty happy with the team that I grabbed. And I think it's a little more of a fun team, although obviously I think there's some good synergy there. I think there's some strong potential there. And I am hoping that we can make something happen here this season for the Philadelphia Pidgeys for our return to Draft League. So I'm excited to start the league. We've been waiting for some time, and the league is officially starting games this week. So by the end of this week, I should have my first game in the league this season for you guys. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I hope you guys are looking forward to that as well. Another quick thing that I decided that I'm going to do here, I decided that in order to kind of supplement content, seeing as how normally what I do is for the entirety of a draft league that I've joined, um, I normally don't do any other content or battles or anything like that during the draft season, so I kind of focus on my draft matches. But to kind of feed that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually post a post game commentary video. Probably a couple days after I post each weekly match. So that's another thing that I probably failed to mention that I should have mentioned earlier is that this is going to be a 9 week season. So yeah, that would have been a helpful thing for me to state earlier in the video, but I just forgot about it and now I just remembered it. So yeah, it's going to be a 9 week season. We're going to be playing 9 different opponents throughout the course of that season. And then the 8 players or coaches out of 16 with the best records are going to advance to the playoffs after that 9 week period. So obviously, we're gunning for the playoffs. That's always our goal anytime we enter a draft league. And yeah, we'll see if we can get it done. I am very much looking forward to this season and seeing how it plays out. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for this one. So thanks for watching again, everybody. Hope you all enjoyed. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, and/or subscribe if you did enjoy, and stay tuned for more new videos in the future. So that's it, and we'll see you next time.